When renowned civil rights attorney Julian Styles is violently arrested during a peaceful protest, it ignites a firestorm of outrage. But what starts as a wrongful arrest quickly unravels into something far more sinister. As a hidden conspiracy within the police department is exposed, Julian finds himself in a battle for justice that threatens to destroy everything he stands for. With the support of a brave lieutenant who risks everything, Julian becomes the catalyst for a movement that could change the system forever. But the deeper they dig, the more dangerous the game becomes, and not everyone will make it out unscathed. Stay with us till the end, and witness how one man's fight for truth ignites a revolution. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more gripping stories like this one. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. It was a warm evening in downtown Cleveland, and the streets were packed with people chanting for justice. The city had been in the grips of civil unrest for weeks now, following the most recent incident of police brutality. Julian Styles, a renowned civil rights attorney, stood at the forefront of the march, leading a sea of demonstrators holding signs that demanded change. His presence alone carried immense weight. He had represented countless victims of racial injustice, and now he was here, standing shoulder to shoulder with the community. Despite the peaceful nature of the protest, there was tension in the air. Riot police had formed a barricade near the courthouse, a wall of shields and batons ready to charge at any moment. Julian knew the risks involved in being at the protest, but he had spent his entire career fighting these battles. He wasn't about to back down now. As the crowd reached the steps of City Hall, a voice rang out from the police line. "Disperse immediately. This is an unlawful assembly." It was a declaration that only heightened the crowd's determination. The chants grew louder, echoing through the buildings around them. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Without warning, two officers broke from the police line. Julian recognized them instantly, Officer Riker and Officer Vic. They were notorious in the community, known for their excessive use of force, especially against black and brown protesters. Before Julian could react, they charged at him. "You're under arrest," Riker shouted, grabbing Julian by the arm and twisting it behind his back with brutal force. "What is this?" Julian shouted, wincing in pain as they slammed him to the ground. "This is a peaceful protest." Vic kneeled on Julian's back, pressing his weight into him. "Resisting arrest, huh?" "Typical," Vic sneered, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Julian gasped for air as the officers hauled him to his feet, dragging him toward a waiting police van. The crowd around them erupted in fury, cameras flashing as people recorded the violent arrest. Julian knew the game they were playing. Riker and Vic had been gunning for him for months, waiting for an opportunity to take him down. "You won't get away with this," Julian shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of sirens and the growing chants of the protesters. As he was thrown into the back of the van, his mind raced. He had seen this play out too many times before, peaceful protesters turned into criminals by the system. But this time, they had made a mistake. Julian wasn't just any protester, he was a man with a mission, and his arrest was about to expose a far deeper conspiracy. As Julian sat in the back of the police van, his wrists painfully shackled behind him. The sounds of the protest still echoed in his ears as the vehicle sped away from City Hall. Through the narrow barred window, he could see the faces of protesters fading into the distance. Rage boiled in his chest. He had been in tough situations before, but this felt different. This felt like a coordinated effort, not just the product of a couple of bad cops on a power trip. He knew Riker and Vic had it out for him. He'd faced them in court before, defending victims of their brutality. But this was a setup. As the van jolted down the road, Julian's mind raced, trying to figure out what they were planning to charge him with. He had done nothing wrong. But in a system that protected itself at all costs, innocence meant little. Julian closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He wasn't afraid of what they'd throw at him. He knew the law, and he knew that once the truth came out, Riker and Vic would have a much bigger problem on their hands than they realized. As the van pulled into the precinct parking lot, Julian braced himself for what was next. The door swung open, and Riker yanked him out roughly, grinning like he had just caught a trophy. "Civil rights attorney, huh? Let's see how you like being on the other side of the bars," Riker sneered. Go ahead, Julian shot back, glaring at Riker. Let's see what kind of lies you come up with. I'll make sure the world knows what happened here. Riker's smirk faltered, but he didn't respond. Instead, they dragged Julian into the station, where he was quickly processed, photographed, and thrown into a holding cell. As Julian sat on the cold bench in the dimly lit cell, he thought about the protest. His arrest would no doubt make headlines. But there was something far deeper going on here. This wasn't just an attempt to silence him. It felt like a trap, a calculated move by someone higher up. He just didn't know who yet. Lieutenant Maya Ramos sat at her desk, flipping through arrest reports from the day's protest. She was used to seeing routine paperwork after events like these, disorderly conduct, trespassing, and the occasional assault charge. But something caught her eye this time. Julian Styles. Maya knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. Julian was one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the country, a man who had made it his life's mission to hold the police accountable. So, what was he doing here, arrested during a peaceful protest? She picked up the report filed by Riker and Vic, her eyes narrowing as she read the details. It was thin, too thin. The charges didn't add up. According to the officers, Julian had resisted arrest and incited violence, but there was no footage or evidence to support the claims. Maya had been in law enforcement long enough to smell a setup, and this one reeked of it. She closed the file, her mind racing. Something wasn't right, and her gut told her this was more than just an overzealous arrest. She needed answers. Standing up from her desk, she made her way to the holding cells. The dim hallway buzzed with the hum of overhead lights as she walked past rows of empty cells until she reached Julian's. He was sitting on the bench, leaning back against the wall with his eyes closed, as if deep in thought. He looked calm, far too calm for a man in his situation. Julian Styles? Maya said, her voice echoing slightly in the small space. Julian's eyes flicked open, and he sat up straighter. Lieutenant Ramos, I presume, he said with a hint of a smile, recognizing her from local news. You've made quite the stir out there today, she said, crossing her arms. Mind telling me what really happened? Julian leaned forward, his tone growing serious. You know as well as I do that I didn't resist arrest, and I certainly didn't incite any violence. Riker and Vic are setting me up. Maya nodded slowly. That much is obvious. But I need more than your word. What were you really doing out there? Julian hesitated, studying Maya's face. He had heard good things about her. A cop who played by the rules, one of the few officers who actually cared about justice. Still, this was a dangerous game, and trusting the wrong person could blow everything. But then again, staying silent could be just as dangerous. I'm not just an attorney, Julian said, his voice low. I'm working undercover with a federal investigation into corruption within the department. Maya's eyes widened slightly, though she quickly masked her surprise. Undercover? For how long? A little over a year, Julian replied. I've been gathering evidence, tracking corrupt officers, and working with a team of investigators to build a case. Riker and Vic are part of something much bigger. They think they're untouchable. Maya's mind raced. She had heard rumors of corruption within the department but had never seen concrete evidence. If what Julian was saying was true, this could blow the lid off a major conspiracy. But it also put them both in grave danger. You have proof? She asked quietly. Julian nodded. I do. But it's not just about me. The corruption runs deep. There are officers, higher-ups, even city officials involved. They'll do anything to protect themselves. Maya exhaled slowly, her decision made. I'm in. Whatever you need, I'll help you expose this. Julian studied her for a moment before nodding. Good. We're going to need all the help we can get. The next few days were a blur of whispered meetings, late-night research, and careful maneuvering. Maya used her position to dig through internal files, pulling records that had been buried or doctored over the years. What she found was worse than she had imagined. Riker and Vic weren't just rogue officers. They were part of a network of officers who had been involved in everything from falsifying reports to covering up violent crimes committed by their fellow cops. And the cover-ups went all the way to the top. The police chief himself had been implicated in several cases where evidence had mysteriously disappeared or been altered. Maya couldn't believe how deep the corruption ran. These weren't just a few bad apples. This was a rot that had infected the entire department. Julian had been right all along. Late one evening, Maya met Julian in a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of the city. They sat in a booth in the corner, their voices hushed as they discussed the case. Julian had brought more evidence, documents, videos, and testimony from officers who had come forward, all pointing to a systematic abuse of power within the department. "We have enough to blow this wide open," Julian said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "This is everything I've gathered. Once this goes public, they won't be able to hide anymore." Maya stared at the flash drive, feeling the weight of what they were about to do. "Are you sure we're ready for this? They're not going to go down without a fight." "I know," Julian said, "but we can't wait any longer. Every day we delay, more people suffer. We have to act now." Maya nodded, her resolve hardening. She had seen too much, and there was no turning back now. "Let's do it." The morning after Julian's arrest, the news broke. The footage of his violent arrest at the protest had gone viral, sparking outrage across the country. Protesters flooded the streets once again, this time demanding justice for Julian and an end to police corruption. But the real bombshell came when Julian's undercover investigation was leaked to the media. News outlets reported that he had been working with federal authorities to expose widespread corruption within the police department. The revelation sent shockwaves through the city. Community leaders, activists, and local politicians rallied around Julian's case, calling for a full investigation into the department. The protests grew larger and more organized, with demonstrators demanding the immediate suspension of Riker, Vic, and any other officers implicated in the corruption. Riker and Vic, meanwhile, faced intense public scrutiny. Their past actions were brought into the spotlight, and stories of their brutality and misconduct began to surface. But the two officers remained defiant, confident that they would be protected by the system they had served for so long. The pressure on the police department reached a boiling point. Faced with mounting public outrage, the police chief was forced to hold a press conference to address the situation. The room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing as the chief stepped up to the podium. "We deeply regret the events that took place during the protest," the chief began, his tone measured and rehearsed. "We are conducting a full internal investigation into the actions of officers Riker and Vic, and we want to assure the public that we take these allegations seriously." Julian watched the press conference from his attorney's office, his jaw clenched in anger. The chief's apology was nothing more than a PR move, a weak attempt to placate the public without addressing the real issue. There was no mention of the corruption, no acknowledgement of the systemic racism that had plagued the department for years. "This is all they're willing to offer?" Julian muttered. "An apology?" His attorney, a sharp woman named Karen Wells, glanced at him over her glasses. "It's a start, but it's not enough. We need to keep the pressure on." Julian nodded, his mind already working on his next move. He had no intention of letting the department sweep this under the rug. It was time to take the fight to the next level. As the days passed, Maya continued to dig deeper into the department's records, uncovering more evidence of corruption. The deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. Officers who had been complicit in the cover-ups began to close ranks, making it clear that they would do whatever it took to protect themselves. One night, as Maya sat in her office reviewing files, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number: "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Maya stared at the screen, her heart racing. She knew the risks of what she was doing, but she couldn't let fear stop her now. Too many lives had been destroyed by this system, and she wasn't going to back down. She forwarded the message to Julian, adding a note: "We're getting close." Julian replied almost immediately: "Stay strong. We're almost there." But the threats were a reminder of just how high the stakes were. They were going up against a powerful institution, one that wouldn't hesitate to destroy them if it meant keeping their secrets safe. Under increasing pressure from the media and the community, Riker and Vic were finally suspended from the force. It was a small victory, but it felt hollow. The two officers remained unrepentant, confident that their suspension would be temporary and that they would soon return to their jobs. But for the department, the fallout was far from over. As Maya's investigation continued, more officers were implicated in the corruption scandal. The department was in chaos, with accusations flying and internal divisions growing deeper by the day. Julian's legal team filed a lawsuit against the police department, seeking damages for his wrongful arrest and the systemic abuses that had been exposed. The case quickly became a flashpoint in the national conversation about police reform, drawing attention from civil rights groups and activists across the country. In the midst of the turmoil, Julian was invited to speak at a rally in front of City Hall. The crowd was massive, stretching for blocks in every direction. People held signs that read, "Justice for Julian," and "End police corruption," their voices a unified cry for change. As Julian stepped up to the podium, the energy in the air was electric. He took a deep breath, scanning the sea of faces before him. This was his moment, a chance to ignite a movement that would demand real, lasting reform. "Thank you all for being here," Julian began, his voice carrying over the crowd. "We are standing at a crossroads in history. For too long, we have allowed a system that is supposed to protect us to be corrupted by power and prejudice. We have seen too many lives destroyed, too many families torn apart by injustice. But today we say enough is enough." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Julian held up his hand, signaling for silence. "We cannot stop at apologies," he continued. "We cannot be satisfied with half measures and empty promises. We must demand real change, radical change. We must dismantle the systems of oppression that have plagued our communities for generations. And we must do it together." Julian's words ignited something deep within the crowd. The energy surged, and for the first time in a long time, people felt hope. They felt that change was not only possible, it was within their reach. Julian's speech became the rallying cry for a growing movement. Protests spread across the country, as people took to the streets to demand justice and accountability. Civil rights organizations, activists, and community leaders joined forces, pushing for legislative reforms and policy changes that would address systemic racism in policing. Maya and Julian continued to work together, using the momentum of the movement to push for deeper investigations into police misconduct. Their partnership grew stronger, built on mutual respect and a shared determination to see justice prevail. The movement gained national attention, with politicians and celebrities lending their voices to the cause. But with that attention came new challenges. The opposition grew fiercer as police unions and conservative groups fought back, accusing Julian and his allies of trying to dismantle law and order. But Julian remained undeterred. He knew that real change was never easy, and he was prepared to fight as long as it took. As the movement gained momentum, real change began to take shape. Cities across the country implemented new policies aimed at holding police officers accountable for misconduct. Independent oversight boards were established, and body camera footage was made mandatory in departments that had previously resisted transparency. Riker and Vic, along with several other officers, were charged with crimes related to their involvement in the corruption scandal. Their trial became a national spectacle, with Julian and Maya's work at the center of the case. The trial ended in convictions, a rare but powerful victory in the fight for justice. Julian's work didn't stop there. He continued to push for broader reforms, advocating for changes in the criminal justice system that would address racial disparities and promote equity. Maya, too, remained committed to the cause. She became a key figure in the movement for police reform, using her position to ensure that the changes they had fought for were implemented and upheld. As Julian and Maya stood together, watching the city they had fought so hard for begin to heal, they knew that the road ahead would still be long and difficult. But they also knew that they had made a difference, a real, lasting difference that would shape the future for generations to come. Julian's arrest had been the spark that lit the fire of change. What began as a peaceful protest against police brutality had turned into a national movement that forced America to confront its darkest truths. In the end, Julian's refusal to back down had ignited a revolution, one that would stop at nothing to dismantle systemic racism and corruption in policing. But the fight wasn't over. Julian knew that real justice wasn't achieved in a single moment. It was a constant, ongoing battle. But as long as there were people willing to stand up and demand change, the fight would continue. And for Julian, Maya, and the countless others who had joined them in the struggle, That was a fight worth fighting.